Hello, I'm Fiona, and today's message is called Here's Mud in Your Eye. And we're just greatly indebted to Bruxy Cavey for his teaching, which has inspired this short series of messages. And we're going to be taking a really close look at just one of Jesus' miracles, where he healed a man born blind. And the reason we want to focus on this one miracle is because Jesus' healing of the blind man exposes the blind religion of the day. And the lessons from that can very much resonate with our lives today. Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you really are my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And we want to dig into the truth of Jesus' teaching and the way he handled this particular situation. And it's really interesting, I think, on two levels. Firstly, if you're just a little bit interested in Jesus and maybe want to understand him more, this will explain what Jesus was fighting for and why it got him killed. And if you are a Jesus follower, you can look at this miracle and say, what lessons are in there for us? Hopefully, this situation with the man born blind will help us appreciate that even today, there can be a religious mindset where we fall in love with the institution or the traditions more than the person at the centre of it all. When Jesus healed this man, the blind received sight. But as we'll see, the religious people who claimed to be able to see were really the ones who were blind. Jesus exposed a blind religion, and that's important for us today because what we see when we think of God will shape our souls. What we see, what we visualize as we contemplate the person of God, some of that will be revelation. It's what we've learned about God, and that revelation can fill our minds. But some of what we see will be projection. It's what we project onto God, what we've been taught, what we've heard, or our own insecurities that we project onto God. So if we get the wrong picture of God, when we don't see God as he really is, it can affect us in really negative ways. And of course, if we get the right picture of God, it will have an incredibly positive effect on us. When we meditate, consider, contemplate, pray to a loving God, and we only find out about a loving God through Jesus, we become more loving. And the converse is also true. When you meditate on a concept of God who is cold and distant, or perhaps he's involved but he's angry and he punishes people, then something very negative can happen and our fear circuits can be activated, which will ultimately shut down our ability to show empathy and compassion. If we have a negative view of God, that, he's angry and looks at us with disgust, but then we're taught, well, I'm supposed to draw near to him and love him and trust him, we can get stuck in this downward spiral of fear and faith, which can shut down our emotions. So what we see when we think of God will shape our souls. And secondly, religion, sadly, often portrays ultimate reality, God, as we've mentioned, cold and impersonal or angry and punishing. Now, there are some forms of religion that are virtually atheistic, just dealing with a universe of karma, or there are religions that have a very involved God, but he's angry. For example, if we're taught that God sends people who he created to hell, but we're told to draw near to him and to love him, that can cause some dysfunctional fear, faith, commotion. Or if we're told that everything that happens is the express will of God, so every rape, murder, abuse, war, or disaster is somehow the will of God, yet we have to approach him and trust him and call him Father, that's going to result in some messed up emotional struggles where emotions get suppressed so we just don't go mad and we settle maybe for just turning up and following the rules. In those situations, people could be left with unresolved conflict, that they're somehow unworthy slugs and God is mad with them, but there isn't much they can do about it. So the way we see God can shape our souls, and sometimes religion doesn't help us with that. And thirdly, Jesus helps us see God more clearly. Unless we keep Jesus at the centre of what we do as individuals and as a church, we should just stop right now. Any church that just and only loves the regulations, rituals, and routine of meeting together, doing a bit of singing, reading from Holy Book, in the end, it will do damage. But quitting church is not the answer. The solution is to press even further in, right to the centre where Jesus is. The solution is to understand and embrace that Jesus is at the centre of the Bible. He is the heart of the whole thing. And when we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we see the character and the nature and the heart of God. Jesus helps us see God more clearly. And one time, John recorded that Jesus cried out, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me." That is so profound, but it's also so simple. We want to see God clearly? Then look at Jesus. So let's try and keep those 3 points in mind as we look at the miracle that Jesus performed, that John recorded for us in chapter 9. So John chapter 9. But I'd really like to encourage you to grab a cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate, whatever, and sit down and read chapters 7, 8 and 9. You know, there's some great Bible apps out there if you want it read to you, or I'll come around and read it with you. But one way or another, just read that chunk, chapters 7, 8 and 9. So, John chapter 9. But first, a little bit of context. Jesus had been teaching in the temple in Jerusalem during Sukkot. And that was an annual festival to give thanks to God for the way he had taken care of Israel when they'd been in the wilderness with Moses, after they'd left slavery in Egypt. Now, part of how God took care of them was to bring water from the rock, because they'd run out of water, it being the desert and all. So a big part of the festival of Sukkot, or the festival of shelters, was a water ritual. Now, Sukkot lasted for a week, and on each and every day, the high priest took water from the pool of Siloam, paraded it through Jerusalem, and poured it out on a stone altar in the temple. It was a great celebration, and it looked back to what God had done, but it also looked forward, because it was prophesied that when the Messiah came, God, from the temple in Jerusalem, would pour out on his people refreshing rivers. The collecting and parading and pouring of the water happened every day of the festival, but on the last time, they did it 7 times. And it was on this last day, while they were pouring out the water, that Jesus was in another part of the temple teaching what it all really meant. And the events in chapters 7, 8 and 9 all happened on the last day of Sukkot. Jesus had been teaching that he was the true temple. And he'd also said, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from them." Can you imagine? All this water's being poured out in the temple, and Jesus is saying, if you're really thirsty, come to me. If you want water to flow from the rock, I'm the rock. Come to me, and I'll plant my spirit in you, and spiritual refreshing will flow in and through and from you. Okay, here we go. Chapter 9. Jesus has been teaching, the crowds were divided. Was he demon-possessed madman, or was he the Messiah, the chosen one sent from God? And it was all getting really tense. They were picking up rocks to stone him, but he slipped away. And chapter 9, verse 1 says, as Jesus went along, he saw a man born blind from birth. Now, if you were blind in those days, you were considered imperfect and you weren't allowed in the temple. But Jesus, who helps us see God more clearly, sought out people on the margins, people who God loves. This man was blind. He wasn't allowed in, so the real temple, Jesus, came out to him. Jesus, though, saw a man blind from birth. The disciples saw a blind from birth man. So they went for the deep theological question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? You see, the thinking was, if you were blind, then you must have sinned. So the blindness was punishment for whatever you'd done wrong. It's what we looked at earlier. Religion can teach that God is cold and impersonal or angry and punishing. But then They also taught that babies could sin in the womb. So the question was, who sinned, the blind man or his parents? And this was rubbing up against two different worldviews. One of those is karma, justice now. You do something bad will happen to you. And karma is great for people who have a problem with delayed gratification. They want immediate cause and effect. But the problem with karma is it re-victimizes the victims. And the other view is bad things, sadly, can happen to innocent people. The world is unfair, but that can give us an opportunity to do something, to help, to show love. So Jesus calls us back from judging others or guessing about sin to focus on the person, saying, I don't know what happened before now, but what does love demand of me in this situation now? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Now, here's the thing. This happened in verse 4 has been inserted by the translators. It doesn't exist in the original text. And also in Greek, there's no punctuation. So the translators, very carefully, have to decide where the commas and full stops go. So really, this part could also read, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. In other words, this is an opportunity to do the work of God, and it's an opportunity for us to do the work of God, because Jesus said we must do the works of him who sent me. Jesus was sent by God, and Jesus said, come and join me, let's do this together. So, if you have the power to heal somebody born blind, if you can heal congenital blindness, then you crack on. But if you don't have that gift, Jesus is saying, you don't just kick back and wait for him to do his thing. You still get involved. We are called to partner with Jesus. And as long as it is day means as long as you're alive, we have the opportunity to partner with Jesus in the work of God. So when you have the chance to be compassionate, act. Don't put it off. Do it now. Jesus changed the focus for his followers. When we see suffering, don't look back and say, how did they get here? Look forward and say, what can we do next? How can we be part of that? What's the loving thing to do in this moment? That should be our reaction to suffering. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Do you figure the disciples are thinking, that sounds like miracle talk. Jesus is going to do something incredible. And indeed, Jesus started walking towards the blind guy, and you can imagine the disciples nodding and going, yeah, miracle time. But halfway over, Jesus stopped and spat on the ground. Now, that's not a picture you'll see in any children's Bible or in a stained glass window. Jesus spitting up a whole glob of saliva. And then he picks up the mixture and starts playing with it. And the disciples, what were they thinking? They thought he was going to do a miracle, but to all intents and purposes, Jesus was making mud pies. And then he headed over in the direction of the blind man and he put it on the man's eyes. Jesus put the saliva mud on the blind man's eyes, but he wasn't healed yet. He had to go all the way across Jerusalem and wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. The pool of Siloam, where the high priest was going 7 times that day as part of the festival of Sukkot. Jesus was sending this man right into the middle of the whole religious system to wash his muddy face in their pool of holy water, and then he would be healed. Go, Jesus told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man washed and came home seeing. Now, this is so, shocking. Jesus wasn't just ignoring the religious institution or making some glib remarks about it. He was going full confrontation. He was sort of saying, if you want to find me and follow me, you can't just add a bit of me to what you're already doing. I'm here to pry you free of whatever religious, unhelpful mentality you have, even if it gets me killed. But why did Jesus heal like that? He'd healed more than once before, and each time he healed differently. Sometimes just with a word, sometimes with a touch. He didn't need to do all of this, but if you read on, you'll notice that Jesus healed this man on the Sabbath, and that was something he did do more than once. Now, the Sabbath was a great God-given command, 1 day's rest in 7, but the Sabbath had been turned from a blessing into a burden. Instead of resting and meditating on God's goodness and grace and love, the Sabbath had become about not working. Now, when I was in the Air Force and we went on detachment or on a camp or something, we get a Beano brief. No, not that Beano, B-no. And the Jewish leaders had a sort of Beano brief, and Jesus clearly broke 3 of their rules. And they were, there will be no medical treatment unless it's for a life-threatening situation. And this man had been born blind, so his condition wasn't going to deteriorate for the sake of a day. But Jesus was like, aye, that's true, but I'm here now. And there was to be no applying of healing ointment to the eyes on the Sabbath. Now, the oral law, the tradition of the elders, stipulated that you weren't allowed to use any eye ointment on the Sabbath. But Jesus said, aye, but I'm here now. And the third thing that he went up against was there was to be no mixing on the Sabbath. Their law specifically said that you could add water to your porridge, but you couldn't stir it in. You couldn't do anything that was reminiscent of when Israel had been slaves in Egypt and they had to mix mud and straw to make bricks. No work, no mixing, no kneading of dough or clay. And Jesus said, here's mud in your eye. You see, Jesus is teaching us a hard lesson. You can't just add a little bit of Jesus to your religion. Jesus is the heart of any relationship with God. And Jesus shows us a more beautiful relationship which will change our view of God, because Jesus helps us to see God more clearly. Jesus wasn't cold and impersonal or angry and punishing, and therefore neither is God. Jesus shows us to see that the nature and character and heart of God can shape our souls in a good and wholesome and nourishing way. Jesus helps us see God more clearly, so keep looking at Jesus as long as it is day. We must do the works of God, and the works of God are to love our neighbour as ourselves. If you love others, then by default you're also loving God, and he will receive that love as your spiritual act of worship. When we love others, we delight the heart of God. So the hard questions for us to ask ourselves today, right now: who are we blind to? Who do we keep on the margins? How do we love the suffering people around us? If you're not a Christ follower, salvation doesn't come through Turning Point Church or any other system or church or denomination. Salvation comes through Jesus. If you aren't a Christian, can I encourage you to consider how amazing Jesus really is, and to thoroughly investigate him and diligently seek him and to find him. And if you are a Christian, may you have your eyes truly open to the compassionate Christ that we follow. May we freshly open our eyes to see who we can have caring contact with. May our eyes be open to see people around us who are in pain or suffering, and would we seize that opportunity to be caring and respond to them in love, because we want to follow hard after Jesus.